Terra Nova is weaving together a vibrant network of world builders, soul activists, spirit-led artists, revolutionary mystics, and paradigm-shifting entrepreneurs who share a vision for a regenerative future. Who are you, and why are you here? These are the questions that ground our explorations into the mysteries of life on Earth and beyond. Welcome to this episode of the Terra Nova podcast. This is your host, Sarah Belpedio, and in today's episode, I dive into conversation with my friend Alison Skoff. I met Alison in a human design projector immersion program back in 2022, and since then we have cultivated a deep connection and friendship and really a sisterhood through our exploration of human design and the gene keys and soul work and sacred union, all of these juicy topics. Alison is such a well of wisdom. She has a single channel, the 4816 channel, the 48 being the well. She is a 5/1 splenic projector with fear, motivation, power view on the left angle cross of uncertainty. Her first line investigations go so deep, and she has 11 fifth lines, which I believe is the most fifth lines I've ever met in a person. The fifth line is the heretic, here to challenge norms and push back against the status quo. Something that is so needed at this point in time when we are being fed stories of reality that are not true. And so that really is the gift of the fifth line, the one that's calling out the bullshit and saying, no, this isn't the truth, and pointing us in the direction of a higher and more complete truth, although there is never a wholly complete truth because we are here in human bodies using the language of the mind to communicate. But I digress. In this beautiful conversation, we dive into the soul. What is the soul? Alison's deep passion and really work in this life is soul work, is supporting individuals who are moving through their soul birthing process. Alison has held me through my initiations over the last couple of years as I've navigated divorce and, a variety of other initiations that I will not get into right now, and has also supported me in my exploration of the gene keys. That is a language that comes quite naturally to Alison, in addition to her deep understanding of depth psychology, Jungian psychology, and as we'll get into in the episode, the heroine's journey. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with my dear friend and Terra Nova founding member, Alison Skoff.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to start off by asking you, what is soul?
I feel actually just emotion receiving that question. Because there's like my personal experience with that question, right? And then there's kind of the broader, more universal or collective answer. And of course, both are related. To me, soul is the most sacred part of ourself. It's the most intimate relationship that we could ever possibly have. And it takes cultivation, right? And it takes like time and devotion to it, because it is so sacred. The Buddhists say that soul is like a droplet in the ocean, is one water droplet of the ocean, right? So it's that kind of individuated droplet that is still part of the great body of water that is the ocean. It is still part of the wave. It's not separate, but it is an individuated droplet. Soul is also the direct connection, or the most direct relationship we have to the divine, right? So it is like the intermediary between us on the human side, like the small I, and the great divine. It is the part of us that allows us to move towards the embodiment of our sainted self.
Hmm.
And our soul's only, it is the most profound love that one could ever come to know, is that relationship the soul has with us. And once we turn towards it, right? Because most of the time we spend running from it. Because our soul's plan for us is not necessarily our plan for us, the one we thought we had, or the one the world told us we should have. It is a very unique, individual, sacred, and intimate path that the soul has for us. We don't always get to have that relationship in every lifetime, not everybody will turn towards a soul-oriented or a soul-centric life. We can turn towards it intentionally, through curiosity and breadcrumbs that are left for us, little synchronicities that are left for us. And then other times we're initiated onto the path. And oftentimes that's a very shocking way to come to soul. But nonetheless, like, when the soul wants something, it'll get your attention. Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you. How do the soul and the spirit work together?
Mm. Well, I wasn't expecting all this emotion, but I should have known because of our connection. But-
That means that we're hitting the good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And like, these are such beautiful questions, right?
Let it out.
Yeah. So soul and spirit are very much can be very much like beloveds. Um, and the way I understand them is the soul is the part that is down and in. It's that very feminine, earthy part of us. And the spirit is that up and out. Um, and they meet in the middle, right? They meet right here at the heart chakra for that, divine union, for that like holy unio mystico Kairos Gamos wholeness that's possible right there through the heart center. And so, yeah, that's how I understand them. I mean, we can get into the whole conversation about what's actually happened for most of us in modern Western culture, but yeah, there's a really beautiful relationship that's available between them, but it takes time, and it takes healing. It takes honesty, truth, which is all incredibly vulnerable. um, and it's sometimes has to be fought for. It's not an easy path, and especially with so many distractions for all of us. It's not always the easy path, that path of integration.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to get the conversation around what creates soul loss,
Mm.
why so many of us are walking around disconnected from soul. And then maybe we can transition into the conversation around the process of the initiation to soul, the descent to soul.
Yeah. Soul loss. It's interesting, I think there was a time, not too long ago, that I viewed soul loss as something that needed to be like remedied. Like, oh my gosh, it needs to be fixed. I got to go and like fix it so it's all perfect and shiny because, oh my gosh, soul loss. And I think for me, it was like a really important part of me understanding like the holing process, to feel what it feels like, to actually feel in my body and through my emotions and through my spirit, lack of spirit, feeling like spirit had left me, right? Like feeling like abandoned and betrayed, all of those things that came up with soul loss. I really feel like it was a incredibly important experience to have had for me personally. I think soul loss comes about through many different avenues. I think it can be for some people like death of a thousand paper cuts, like little tiny, chips away at their essential self over time, where they start to walk away and they slowly abandon that soulful part of their heart. And then all of a sudden they walk so far away that they don't know where they are, right? They're out in the wilderness somewhere and they don't have that tether point or that anchor point, or they're at least not connected to it. I mean, it never leaves us, we leave it, you know? And so the world has just gotten more and more filled with distractions and trying to claim our attention from this is important and that is important, and all of these external things that are flooding our minds and our bodies, our thoughts, and making us forget, right? Because I have always felt, and who knows, but I have always felt that we come as like, I mean, we have an ancestral history, but we come as blank slates into this life, right? We come like pure, and we come remembering. We come so connected to our bodies and our needs, and then every day there's just like kind of step further and further away from that as we're asked to be, go out into the world and become adults. As we get older, go, through the developmental cycle, we move further and further away from that because of the way that our culture is set up. I don't think all, I mean, I don't know, but my sense is like it wasn't always like that. I think there was a time when we as humans maintain that sacred connection to our essential self, to our soul self via the earth, right? Via honoring the earth and the elements, and what was here for us, what we received by being born here was here for us, and we recognize that. And I know man and his mind, creates beautiful things, but in that we've left that connection, and that I think that we've abandoned the sacred,
Mhm.
yeah, which is an intense journey back, right? Because we realize we've abandoned it, right?
Yeah. So I would love for you to speak a little bit on, or a lot of it, however much you would like to speak on, the descent to soul, this idea of the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, and how the descent to soul is also different for women.
Yeah. It's, I think, very telling that when I was initiated into a descent, I had no idea about the descent to soul or a heroine's journey at all. Like because we're so masculine focused in our society, and I mean patriarchally focused, because there is a beautiful sacred masculine that is, part of our inherent nature and part of where we come from. There is a sacred masculine. And I do believe we are slowly, restructuring that or remembering that. And I mean, I just want to say too, it's so important that we recognize that, because there's so much warring and othering happening. Yeah, the othering is just going to perpetuate it. We've left a lot of space for the divine feminine to come in, and not a lot of that has come up. And we have to also equally honor the sacred masculine as well in the process. So I was unaware of a heroine's journey. I was very aware of a hero's journey, and the way I had and most of us in Western society interpret that as, it's really based on an achievement, right? So the masculine goes on a journey to get the gold and come back to society and say, "Hey, I've got the gold, right? I've got the prize. I've achieved this thing, and now I'm going to save you all, right? I will be king." It's in all of our myth and fairy tale, a hero's journey. Um, and like I said, I was less familiar with the heroine's journey. The first introduction I had to it was through Maureen Murdoch's book, The Heroine's Journey. And she was a student of Joseph Campbell. And when she went to him with her thesis to, kind of lay out this different paradigm of a journey that a woman would take in reclaiming, wholeness, he said she doesn't need to go on the journey. She's already always there, right? The feminine is already always there. And I understand what he means by that. And certainly from a male perspective, that might be true. But in our Western culture, where things have gotten really muddied, right? Things have gotten conflated and muddied, I think, through movements like feminism. We've kind of we're thinking it's about women's rights, or it's kind of gotten muddied in terms we're thinking it's women's rights, but it's really just women taking on more masculine roles or more masculinity. So I don't know that we really know what wholeness looks like in the body of someone who identifies as a more feminine being and versus what a masculine bodied person does, because we have all of this, right? We have all of this. And so as women, we're in a body that's, and I'm speaking very, I'm trying to speak universally because, again, this is not necessarily gendered, but it is important to make a little bit of a distinction because there are some, hormones that are different in people who are, feminine bodied or female bodied and versus male bodied people. So, I just say that as a disclaimer. I'm trying to talk about the energetics. It's important to note that those with female bodies tend to have more feminine energy, just as a whole. It's never my intention to offend anybody, but so that's the lens I'm coming from. As women or female bodied people that are inside of a culture that or values or prioritize masculine traits over feminine traits, it's very confusing for people who identify as females when they start to go through this process of either a descent to soul or a deconditioning or some sort of psychological process where they're embodying more of their feminine consciousness. It can be very confusing because on the inside, your world is one thing, but on the outside, your world has been something else. And so it's important to note that it is different there. And so a heroine's journey is really about detaching from patriarchal structures. A big part of it is about detaching from patriarchal structures. Because we all had to abandon our essential feminine nature in order to fit in to the culture, in order to belong to the culture and society. There was part of us that had to leave that behind or hide it or dress it up in some way that was more acceptable and palatable. And so on the heroine's journey, it's about going back to reclaim that. And at the end of the heroine's journey is that Kairos Gamos. It is the sacred marriage. It is the unifying of the masculine and feminine principles for her holding process. The feminine journey to psychological wholeness is distinctly different than a man's journey. You know that I've been very drawn to the work of Marion Woodman and Carl Jung, and obviously Carl Jung being a male, but Marion Woodman being a Jungian analyst has given great voice to what it is to be a woman and go through the journey of consciousness and holding through soul reclamation and soul identification. Yeah, really beautiful, important pieces of work for all of us.
Can you speak to how Bill Plotkin's work weaves into the work of Marianne Woodman and Carl Jung?
I think what Bill Plotkin has done through his work, he's very much connected to nature. There's no separation between nature and his work of Journey to Soul. And a lot of his frameworks involve kind of the facets of the compass, like north, south, east, and west. And he gives a really great map for people. I found his work incredibly orienting and grounding when I was like, where am I? I've been plunged down it's almost like, having the cord cut and then like tumbling into this abyss and not knowing where your feet are, or like, where the ground is, which way's up. And so his work has given me context. And so I think Plotkin really gives more of a map to the land of soul territory. And what Marion Woodman does, she gives that kind of that distinction to the actual, like the psychological process. Like, so they're distinct, but I found them both incredibly useful. Bill Plotkin has an entire glossary of terms to help give language to, what one might be experiencing. He maps out the descent to soul in stages, but there's no linearity really to it in terms of timeline, right? So like, here's a stage, but you might be here for years, right? Or you might be wandering for half your life or more. And so having the language and understanding that it's not like an achievement or a linear thing is so helpful and supportive, because soul is such a timeless space, right? We have this life where there's like, your arrival date and then your departure date, but your soul is eternal, right? It's timeless. And so when you're navigating life in a soul-centric way in a time-bound place, it's important to have like those mentors and elders that are helping you understand, like, okay, like this is just a kind of a moment in time that I'm, working these things out, but there is a bigger picture that the soul is going on, or a big, larger journey the soul is going on. So I think Bill Plotkin, the other thing I really like about him is his earlier works. So two of my favorite books are Wild Mind and Journey to Soul Initiation, which is his newest book. That one was really pivotal for me, but I think they're really accessible for people, like if you're in this place, or you felt these stirrings of a soul calling, or like something. A lot of times people will get like those whispers from soul. Like that's, it's hard to explain. It might be like a small discontent or like just a little something. And then these books start to appear in your life.
Can you speak on the importance of community as we move through these soul initiations? And I think would love to hear a little bit about your story as well, because I think as you were moving through these initiations, you didn't have community, and kind of the challenges that posed versus like how this process can be supported and uplifted and celebrated when we're surrounded by soul family and people who know what you're going through and can support you.
Yeah. I want to talk about loneliness, I think, first, because there is this epidemic of loneliness. And I think collectively we're grasping for so many things to really fill that void, that sense of loneliness, that sense of not being seen, that not being felt, not being understood. We're pretending that we are through these other avenues, and social media being a big one. Even any of our belonging that we have inside of some of these interests that we might have as individuals, right? So, it can be anything. It can be health. It can be tools. It can be whatever. So any belonging that we might feel is not, in my experience, or kind of my view, it's not the belonging that we're actually looking for. So that will never be satiated. So we'll just stay on that wheel. And so it's interesting because the soul initiation, or the descent to soul, is such a personal and individual and journey that has got to be done alone, right? But I'll say that with a caveat. It is a solitary journey. But the importance of community, and whether it's people who have not had like in real life or physical community to hold them here, if it's an ancestral community, God or spirit that someone prays to, being held through that birthing, through that soul birthing is, it really, I think, makes all the difference, right? Of whether or not that soul will be delivered via embodiment,
Mm.
or if the pain of labor, or if the delivery will even happen, because there are miscarriages of love. I view the soul as love, as the purest form of love for our individuated self. And sometimes we're stirred awake and we're unable to birth that into this plane. It's very sad to me.
Mm.
Yeah. It's very sad to me because not only for the individual, right, that had whatever initiation or call or suffering, that maybe they're suffering their whole lives, but it's really their soul trying to get them to turn towards it and haven't been able to for whatever reason, because of our culture, because they weren't supported, because of, fear or trauma or wounds. Like, to me, that's a heartbreak for the individual, but then also for all of us, because then we miss out.
Yeah.
We miss out on the beauty of that soul being here embodied.
Mm. Weave these pieces together around the birth of soul. One of my teachers, Dr. Frances Yahia, who's a depth psychologist and shaman, she said, it's your mother's job to give birth to your body, to your vessel, and it's your job to give birth to yourself, to your soul. And that's this process that you're speaking to, this process that I've been going through these past, 6 months or so. So I just wanted to weave those pieces together, that it's all of our responsibilities to, if it's our destiny in this lifetime, if we're able to in this lifetime, to birth through who we are. That's
Yeah.
really what it is. We're birthing the truth of who we are. And few will do that. Few will have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. You asked about my experience of kind of descent and soul birthing and belonging. And I think for me, that was part of my kind of shock or wake up. It's like almost like having a tree shook, right? And all the things that didn't belong in the tree fell off. It was like kind of just left with the trunk. I guess on the personal side, for because I got to actually see, like, oh, they th- they were only seeing what they wanted to see, or the parts that they felt comfortable seeing. In a soul birth, we hold space for whatever needs to come through or move through, move apart, move away. We just hold space for all of it and honor that soul and its process, right? Because there are some souls that have had really hard journeys in this lifetime. And that might mean we're seeing some really hard thing for us. We're seeing parts of humanity that are really hard for us as the observer to see. Can we hold space for them in their process and for our process while we're watching them?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not separate, right? That other person is holding a piece of humanity that maybe we're not holding right now. Maybe we held at one point in our journey, and so we can honor them and say, "I see you. I was there." Or maybe a part we may never have to hold in this lifetime, and we can be grateful that we, by the grace of God or universe, that we didn't have to walk that part of the human journey. And I think that's the piece that, touching on what we've talked about, is like how we can hold life more sacred, or humanity's role in life more sacred, and tender and with compassion. Um, because it's tough down here. I mean, there's so much beauty, but like the waking up part and coming home to who you truly are, that part, it's messy and it's unpredictable and it's uncertain. And, we have to confront the things in ourselves that we didn't want people to see, let alone ourselves fully. So there was, that part of like, wow, people are really, the level of othering and like pushing away of parts of humanity that was happening really showed itself through the way in which community turned away from me because I didn't behave in the way that was comfortable. It was a real shock. And to see who stayed and who didn't, I would say most didn't, who came in place, who arrived when I finally said, I can't keep picking up and pretending. And that's been one of the things that's been so beautiful about coming into my holding process is the people that I've met. I'm like, wow, I can be that awkward self that I tried to cover up for so long. I could be the weird person reading esoteric text that like maybe wasn't, coffee talk before. And it's like time and time again, I'm like humbled and I'm grateful that I get to express these parts of myself that weren't welcomed before for many reasons.
How have the tools of the Gene Keys and astrology and human design supported you in this journey to soul?
This is it's amazing. I think it will continue to dance with me every time I try to put human design down. It, it still has something to show me, I guess, about myself. That's the thing with human design is I've pretty much felt resistance to it from day one, but I cannot put it down because it keeps showing me things about where that resistance in me, what parts of me am I not fully comfortable with, right? Is it my heresy, which is oftentimes it, right? That's often the thing that it keeps poking at. It's this really funny dance between that poke from human design, stirring up my heresy and my mind saying, you can't say that. Don't say that. Or find another nicer way to say that. Right? So it's done an incredible job, highlighting my mind and all the tricks my mind tries to play on me to avoid embodying as parts of myself, right? Which the heresy has been a really hard one for me as a woman who was born when she was into Catholic religion. Lots and lots of conditioning about what it was to be a woman, a girl. And so human design, I think, is really trying to provoke my voice, right? And get rid of niceness, right? It's interesting because some of the people that I respect the most are incredibly heretical, and I'm like, yeah, I love when I see it. I have a visceral reaction when I see someone being heretical because heresy is really about the truth, and it's a high value for me. And I know, and I mean truth, of course, on the mundane level, but I'm talking about the truth, and I'm like the truth of your soul. I get worked up when I feel like that's being obscured in some way, if I'm sitting with someone or if there's a broader thing happening around our system, the way the systems are pulling us further and further away from the truth of our essential nature. So human design, I recognize as a mechanical system and it pokes at me in the ways that it's mechanical, right? And it feels very black and white to me. I have a hard time memorizing the nitty gritty of it. My mind goes foggy around some of the deeper teachings. But when I look at Gene Keys and astrology, it's a completely different felt experience. They feel like colorful gardens to me. And I was thinking about this. I'm like, what is it? Why are they so opposed inside my being? And I think what I find in Gene Keys and archetypal astrology is that they're both weave myths. They both weave the story of the soul, right? And to me, that's where the beauty and the magic come in. That's where the feminine magic comes in. I'm working on my relationship to human design, or allowing it to be what it is and see what it continues to reveal to me. How can I appreciate it instead of just constantly feel that I want to push it away? Because it's obviously I'm not done with it if it keeps coming back. And most of the people, frankly, around me that I have my most cherished conversations with were through human design. I mean, I think all of them were through human design. So there's one thing that I recognize about people in human design, or those that I'm connected to and have conversations with in DMs, because I don't post about human design very often, if at all, but I'm having conversations. It's they recognize depth, and of course, there's a part of me that recognizes the people that I do have connections with inside of the human design sphere do recognize it outside of a black and white system, right? They're seeing it in a way, and this is you, of course, and Cody, in a way that feels very beautiful. So I love hearing people that relate to it in that way. I love hearing them talk about it because it feels so much more alive and beautiful than when if I were to read like it through other methods. I've gotten most of my human design education through women who have found a love for the system in a way that feels very beautiful to me. I feel like my relationship to Gene Keys and archetypal astrology is that love and that beauty and that dancing. And there's a lot of spaciousness and nuance in archetypal astrology and Gene Keys that I love to dance with, right? That I feel so held and seen by. They're not logical. They just get to be artful. That's what it feels like. It feels like art. Like if I sit down with if it's one component of either of those or a whole chart, it's like a beautiful composition of a symphony. That's what it feels like. And it feels like it tells a story where human design talks about the parts. To me, the Gene Keys and archetypal astrology tell the story. It's like the music being played, you know? Yeah.
Mhm.
Beautiful. I think for me, human design came into my life first in 2018, but I ran away from it very quickly. When the Gene Keys came into my life, it pulled me back to human design. And if I think about these systems that found me in my descent, right? And I was really looking and grasping for something for orientation, because the ground had been dropped out from beneath me. And what I found is what I know about myself is I know and have had experiences of this sacred one, right? This kind of more unity consciousness in terms of like our wholeness and our spiritual connection. And I think part of what the resistance that I'm having or that I've had with human design is that it breaks things down into component parts often. Often in the way it's presented and taught is breaking down, separation, separate, 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 separate. And it's not the truth of the system. I understand that. But the way in which it's presented and has been picked up by mainstream because we are so separate, like because there's so much separation happening, if you put something into a system and it's already running a program of separation, it's going to continue to run that program of separation. The mind just does that, right? The mind just separates, categorizes, dices up, tries to find logical reasons for things. And so I feel like for me, human design was triggering that and I didn't like it. Like it doesn't feel good for me to
Mhm.
go into separation. For me, I can recognize that this was a holding process for me, a holding and recognizing our shared humanity, the collective, and actually anchoring that in and embodying that for me. And I feel like actually before my descent, there was a part of I just knew that, right? I just knew that. And then when I experienced all these kind of traumatic things, like my world got tossed. And I said, well, if I had this experience, but this is now the experience I'm having, what is real? Like, what is real? And I found that the Gene Keys and archetypal astrology gave me, I don't know, they're not systems, really like a dance floor almost for me to be able to understand like my soul's journey, but then also that everyone else has their own soul's journey, but it's all moving at the same we're all like on this earth together on a dance floor together moving. And so the more we tune into our own frequency and our own song, which is laid out in our gene key profile and through our astrology, when we listen to our own song and dance to our tune, our dance partners show up and they're in their rhythm and they're in their tune. And that's where the fractal stuff starts to happen, right? Because we're breathing together, right? That's what felt more beautiful because it spoke more to the togetherness than human design has ever to me. And that's
Mm.
probably part of why I'm here is to weave that togetherness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll share a little bit of my story because when I came to human design, I didn't have any spiritual context or background. And so, a lot of people, when they come to human design, they've already been into some of these other spiritual modalities. I had a little bit of experience studying yoga, studying Buddhism. I grew up in the Baha'i faith, and so I grew up around these like really beautiful spiritual principles, but I never really considered myself religious or even identified with being a Baha'i. And so when I came into human design, I didn't really have any other tools in my toolbox to support that process. Those tools kind of came over time. Gene Keys came over time. Um, I started working with a shaman maybe 6 months after finding human design. And then it was just this like the Pandora's box opened. And all of these other complementary modalities came in, astrology and Gene Keys being two of the primary ones. And something that I had to reckon with this year, being in my 4th year in my deconditioning process in my human design experiment, was the lack of foundation that I had using this very mystical information, right? So Ra Uru, the founder of human design, really wanted to position the system as this like emerging science. And I understand the motivation behind that, right? Thinking that if we can prove this through this scientific lens, then more people will be open to it. But I think in that pursuit, a lot of the magic and the mysticism was pushed aside and glossed over and not really given the respect and the honor that it deserves, and led to this dynamic where there are now many people, prominent leaders and teachers in the human design community who are using human design but lack a foundation in basic spiritual principles and basic understanding of natural law. And so I think we're seeing the symptoms of that bubble up right now. And I think something that our fractal feels called to breathe life into this conversation around how can we remystify human design? How can we bring the sacredness to human design? How can we look at the deconditioning process from this lens of initiation into soul? How can we bring the community support that I think is necessary as you move through these initiations into who you are and why you're here? How can we hold people as they move through this process and witness them as they're being called into their role, into their sacred role within the whole? And so I love that you spoke a little bit to how your feeling of human design was that it was separating. I'd never really conceptualized of it that way, but that's it's such a beautiful and poignant observation. And what was coming through when you were saying that is that there is in order to understand how we fit into the whole, we have to go through that individuation process. We have to almost go through that separation in order to understand our uniqueness and how we are meant to integrate into the whole, into that unity consciousness. And so these systems that in, your experience and definitely in mine as well, and so many of us have felt almost like these polarities. I think that's intentional, right? Or maybe it wasn't intended by Ra, but intended by life, universe, God.
Yeah.
That there is this inherent tension, and that tension is bringing us to this deeper harmony.
Yeah.
When we're able to weave them together. And so I would love to now touch a little bit on I think the danger that we run into when we're using these spiritual codes, which is what human design is, right? The 64 hexagrams of the I Ching and Ra's interpretation through the gates, the Kabbalah, the chakra system. All of these are deeply mystical, esoteric teachings, thousands of years old. And many would argue that the system is not honoring those roots and teaching the mystical roots of this system. And so the analogy that keeps coming up for me is like human design gives you the keys to the Ferrari without teaching you how to drive. And so I would love for you to speak a little bit on, just from your perspective, what is the danger of using this deeply mystical, esoteric information, wisdom, codes, without having that spiritual foundation?
Well, I think in a short, I have a lot to say, but in a short answer, we perpetuate separation. We don't get any closer we don't get any closer to realizing our evolution on an embodied level. So evolution is going to do what evolution does, and it's just going to keep moving along. New people will come along, and it'll keep trying. But like on an individual level, we won't really have that full recognition. I think it just perpetuates separation, as I touched on earlier. When I was listening to you speak, what I kept thinking is there isn't a reverence for some of this ancient wisdom, which is a reflection of devaluing the feminine or abandoning the feminine, right? And that's in part what we're here to heal, right? And so all of these systems and the people that teach them and how we come to them is an opportunity for that to be revealed, and for us then to take the responsibility to do the healing work and the consciousness work and the letting go and the surrendering and holding things sacred and holding reverence for teachings, finding humility, elders who can guide us. I think part of what I see happening if we don't reconnect with the sacred collectively, right? If collectively we don't reconnect with the sacred, we'll end up in a mechanical world. And certainly now with Pluto and Aquarius, the dawn of I mean, The Matrix had a movie on this 20 years ago. That's essentially what happened, right? Is the machines took over and they lost the sentient piece, or the sentient people had to go underground, into hiding. And so we just run the risk of losing connection with life itself, right? Things become dry and brittle. Sometimes human design has felt brittle to me.
Sterile.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we don't take the journey with the spiritual in hand, right? I'm not saying we need to throw out the baby with the bathwater and not to throw human design out, but when we don't walk with the spiritual as well, which is a part of us, right? So we have the psychological and the mental, and we have a spiritual side. We all have one. When we leave that behind, we don't get the chance to mature either. So when you said it's like being given the keys to a Ferrari, all I saw was like a little baby with the keys to Ferrari trying to drive the car, right? And like, what is a baby in a car going to do? Make a mess, right? Put itself in danger, put other people in danger, maybe never get the car anywhere. I think I need to make a distinction. Like, we're not talking about passenger consciousness here. This is just a metaphor. So hopefully people understand that. We were given the gift of incarnation to recognize it, and we've forgotten it was a gift, right? And like to be able to breathe, to be able to touch, feel, see, sense, all of these things is something love, connect, be in communion with, is something that we only get to experience here on Earth. And we're so busy trying to keep our nose in our books and figure out how to perfect our differentiation process, we're missing the point too, Any spiritual tool that we've taken on and the mind co-ops, we run the risk of missing the point and just continually like navel gazing. Before any of these tools were around, the Buddha said, don't mistake the finger pointing to the moon for the moon, right? And so all of these systems, human design, even the gene keys and astrology, are just pointing us to something greater that's outside of systems that we and conditioning that we're born into. They are tools that can assist us. But eventually we can let them go too, right? Eventually we don't need those either, right? Because we recognize them for what they are. They're kind of mapping out the illusion.
Mm-hmm. I want to read that quote. So Alison shared this quote with me from, I believe it was the Venus sequence course that you did from Richard Rudd. If you choose the mechanical universe, you'll remain confined inside its walls. If you choose the magical, then a whole new world will begin opening up inside of you, and you'll see that the mechanical is simply the workings of the illusion. I'd love to dive into this a little bit. The mechanical, simply the workings of the illusion. So through the lens of human design, we're able to see the mechanics of the Maya, right? That's what human design is all about. The mechanics of the Maya, the mechanics of this illusion within which we all live as humans. But that's not it doesn't end there, right? And so I think so many people in human design can get stuck in like, okay, well, the first step is cultivating awareness, is seeing the Maya for what it is and seeing all of the ways that it's keeping us trapped. But then what I've noticed is that there's no, like, then what? Right? There's something about it that feels almost like a little sadistic to me.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, so now you see all of these things happening. You come into acceptance with the way that life is, the way that the Maya operates. But there's what isn't the whole purpose of these systems to help us liberate ourselves from the trappings of the Maya.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to speak on that.
Yeah. Yes, to everything you just said. And this is why I'm so passionate about myth and personal myth, and finding like what Bill Plotkin calls mythopoetic identity. Like and you touched on this in your post recently. Like there is a reason why your soul came into the body that it came into in the time. There is a task. It might be a very small task, like to raise a very specific pet. Like it's not going to be a grand, world stage for everybody, but there is a very specific task. And that's the way in which you bring your unique flavor of love. Because to me, your design, your hologenetic profile, your astrology is the way in which you have the ability to bring love to this planet. And sometimes love, I want to make a distinction too. Like it's not always warm and fuzzy. Like truth can be very piercing, and truth and love are, they're bedfellows, right? Truth can be cutting, right? Truth can be painful, especially if it's coming from a heretic, right? Like, ouch, that stung. But if it's in service of evolution and of wholeness and of this, we're evolving together as a collective, like to me, that's an incredibly loving thing because it's divine will, right? And when we're in surrender to divine will, free will doesn't really matter as much, like it's not as attractive. Like free will is like not going to have that shiny object syndrome that divine will is, because divine will just moves through you. You're moved, right? And I think many of us have had, if we're lucky enough, have had those moments where we don't know where an inspiration is coming from. It's just coming through us, and we're something's coming out of us as a result of it. It's not like, oh, I took this idea and I'm going to make, we see a lot of that on social media where I'm going to tell you how to make your business a 6-figure business and whatever. Like that's free will, right? That's different. And that there's nothing wrong with one or the other, but there's, I think more and more of us that are called to integrate the spiritual side, right? And the sacred will find that the free will and the games of the Maya are not appealing, and they're not fulfilling, and they're, and if we try to pick them up, which I've done a number of times, it's very shattering. It's just, there's not energy around it to see it through. Right.
Mhm.
And so with, the human design thing, it's like a booby prize, right? Like when you finally see and you're like, oh my God, I could just stay on this wheel forever. Like, how do I get off the wheel? Those are the questions that we start contemplating, right? Like, oh, I see it, but now what? Like, okay, I have the aware, but like, how do I get off this wheel? And this is the work that I find most deeply touching is, and this is where the soul work comes in, right? And so I think of great leaders and elders like Joanna Macy in particular. She's very much for the environment, and that's where her soul work is. But more broadly, she's talking about soul activism, like what our soul, not our activism, like righteousness, not our self-righteousness in terms of like what we think is wrong, and we're gonna judge something wrong, and we're gonna correct it. No, soul activism is being so quiet and still and finding the thing that you love and pouring your love into that thing. That's sacred work. That is work, right? And so I was pointing to your post recently about work, right? And we are here to work and from that sacred calling, right? And again, it can be small and quiet. It could be, a monk sitting on a mountain pouring tea. That could be their sacred calling, right? It doesn't have to be movements, right? Yeah. And there's like, I think to what you were speaking to so beautifully in your post is there's a distinction, because I love words, right? And so I kind of get curious about like, okay, well, what's the etymology of work? And so I researched it, of course, after your post. And I think we collectively, because we lived in a, kind of a colonial, capitalistic, patriarchal society, that's just been the nature of what we've lived in, all of us, work has meant production, outcomes, ROIs, like, profits and, all these things, like something to show for, right? And has meant physical labor oftentimes. But I think something that you're touching on, and I want to name here, is creativity, right? And so and you were talking specifically about projectors. We are here to create that life that is embodied soul, right? And like that is a really beautiful thing, because I think when we just use the word work and we're using it from the frame that we have known it, of course, projectors are going to be like, no, I'm not going to do it, because we're not designed to work in that way, right? Of course not. Like, but we are here to
But
create.
arguably, nobody's designed to work in that way,
Nope.
right?
That's right.
I think that's really what I was trying to provoke a little bit through
Yep.
that post is like, oh, so projectors don't have to do the capitalist work thing, but generators do?
Right.
That's right. That's speaking to, Chaitanya, the man who runs Zen Human Design. He calls it the human design caste system, the types.
Yes.
Because it's saying like, oh, well, you're a projector, you're here to be the leader of the new earth. That's given all these projectors this superiority complex.
Yes.
And then all these generators feeling like, oh, okay, so, but then I can't be a leader. And it's like, no, we're all of us have the capacity to be leaders. All of us have a unique contribution to make
Beautiful.
to this world. And personally, that post, I lived that out, right? I haven't worked for the last 2 years. And guess what? I haven't felt any more success. In fact, I've actually almost lost my fucking mind
Same.
as a result of it.
Yep.
And so I
Yep.
think like, and I understand that like Ra wasn't saying that projectors do nothing, but I was trying to poke a little bit at the fact that we latch on to some of these sayings from the,
Yeah.
guru, which is, how a lot of people, they say, oh yeah, we're moving beyond the guru, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of the ways that the people in the human design community are relating to Ra is still the guru. Oh, well, Ra said this, Ra said this. It's like,
That's fine.
who fucking
He
cares?
can't put off that pedestal.
But people just latch on to some of these sayings and then create a meaning that I don't think he actually meant.
Yeah.
I
agree with
but
you.
still, it's harmful because it ends up that's what ends up spreading on social media, spreading out, through all of the different people who are working with the system. And then all of a sudden, you have really disempowering things floating around for all types, not just for projectors. So, but I feel so deeply like my soul work is to empower and make sure that everybody's doing their soul work. It's this like momager thing that has kind of come through this past year. Like, and really with that post, it's like, guys, we got to get to work.
Yeah.
Like open your eyes, look out there. Like, we have the power to change things, to co-create a new reality. But if we're not tuned into what our work is and channeling that work, committing to that work, devoting ourselves to that work, that new reality is never going to be created. And so, yeah, I want to hold space for a community of people who are ready to do the work, to step into the work. And I think this is another just like misunderstanding that floats around in the kind of online spiritual communities is like, oh, we're just here to eat raspberries under the tree. And it's like, actually, no, when we're not in a body, we're floating out there, beyond time, and we're chilling. But we come here, with a mission, with a purpose, with a specific role to play, a specific job that we signed up for. And we have these bodies for a reason. And again, that doesn't mean that the work is going to look and feel like how we've been conditioned to perceive work under capitalism. Right. And so I think there's just a little bit of like reframing around work and almost honestly like healing our relationship to work, right? Because we have been abused under capitalism.
Well said.
But anyways, that's my soapbox.
I think it's important to have these conversations because the word, there's such a bad taste. We all have been like, abuse is such a great analogy. So also we have to recognize like that we've been taken advantage of, but we have also been complicit in that, right? So I had to walk, that was painful. In which ways have I been complicit? Have I been both supported by and, devalued by, patriarchal, capitalistic, colonial belief systems? That's an intense self-inquiry and evaluation. But I think putting the sacred back in work, right? Putting in putting soul back into, how we express in this world, right? And purpose, taking it back from the capitalistic understanding of purpose, and understanding purpose is lived, right? It comes out, it's coming out in this conversation between us, right? It comes out, at the checkout line at the store. Like, purpose can be expressed all the time. And when we get to there's this really beautiful quote, and I'm not going to be able to recall the whole thing, but and I think his name's Steve Moroby, and the wise man knows that there's no distinction between work and play. Like, you're just always doing both, right? You're just living, right? You're just living. And to me, that's been something that stayed with me, and something that it's been hard to find that integration. In the world where I source my income, it's hard, So yeah, but we'll get there. I mean, if there's a recognition of it, there's an opportunity for integration and holding and healing,
How do you think that Terra Nova can support that process of integration? Because I know so many people are living this, right? It's like we are getting more and more information about this soul work, our life's purpose, our mission, but it hasn't gotten to a place where that's supporting our material needs.
Yeah.
And so there's this balancing that's happening of still having to participate in, work that is life force draining in the more kind of patriarchal capitalist sense. in order to survive on this plane, but also this deep calling from the soul that we need to, bring through our medicine as well. And it feels like we're trying to weave those things, but they're not quite there yet.
Yeah. Well, I think because Terra Nova is a community where we can come together and have these conversations where we're just inquiring, right? We're holding these questions and watching what emerges between the members, right? Between those that are connected through Terra Nova. I think living the question, that's something that I've taken on as a practice, is just like living the question and seeing what spontaneously arises, like not thinking I know or I have the answer, but just seeing what shows up. And that could be through other people or just, through something I'm moved to do via, inspiration or divine grace. I think it's important that so not only do we have the conversation, but like part of what's happened to us collectively is that we've become so dependent on the system. Like they've made everything convenient for us, right? We can just press the button and something's at our house like in hours or, a day or something. And like we literally, I make very little, right? But hundreds of years ago, we were making so many of our own things that we used on a daily basis. So, how do we, and that's going to take time, right? Some of us, not some of us have never been taught the skill. I think many skills have probably been lost. So there's a period there where there's a learning. We haven't been nurtured via elders or taught via elders, like how to do some of these things. So I think the opportunity that comes through is sharing resources, right? In a community, if someone has a skill or, a specific thing that they are able to do and can share, I think that's a way we can relearn. And even if it's like teaching the thing, right? Like I'm going to teach you how to make butter, or I'm going to teach you, how to do whatever can, or, it's things where we can then slowly, and it's going to take time, right? Because unfortunately, because we're so many are kind of bound by the collective 9 to 5, there's not a lot of energy left for them to learn something new or take on some. So it feels like there needs to be a breaking free, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that happen in the next 2 years. Honestly, like people all of a sudden have a lot of time on their hands, or because of necessity, their hands are forced in order to learn how to do things,
Can you say more on that?
What
Are you speaking to like astrological transits that you feel like are going to bring that about in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I feel like there's been a lineup of that happening. I mean, like, and certainly 2025, we have all the outer planets changing signs, which is like, I read yesterday that in the 3,000 years that they've been documenting and following all the planets, there's no known documentation of that ever happening, where all the outer planets changed in the same year.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So it's going to be.
I got to fact
Pluto
check
that. Pluto just moved.
Yep.
Neptune will be moving.
Yep.
From Pisces to Aries.
Yep.
Uranus will be moving from Taurus to Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn will be moving from Pisces to Aries.
Mm-hmm.
Are those all the outer planets?
Yeah. And Jupiter's a social planet. It's not really an outer planet, but social. And it's moving as well from Gemini to Cancer.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's
that's going to be just a complete shift in reality, literally. Like, can you share a little bit about what, like, for people who might not be as familiar with astrology, what does it mean to have all of those planets shifting at once?
Well, I guess we're all going to find out together, but what you're pointing to, yes. So the outer planets are like more collective, cultural, or like broad strokes in terms of like they're guiding the collective on the planet. And so to me, it's like it's like a change in an act, like it's like the next act in a play. And we can look at the elements. So Saturn and Neptune are moving into fire from water, and Uranus is moving into air. Both of these are very fast moving energies. And so I think things are going to feel like, whether it's because events are happening like really like a lot all at once, and so time's going to feel like it's moving quickly, or just simply like time is actually going to be moving quickly. It's, we'll find out. But um yeah, there's like an acceleration happening, I think. And I mean, nobody really knows what will happen when we cross that doorstep in 2027, when the background frequency changes. But there is like this quickening that's happening, and oftentimes at the end of something, when something is dying, when in nature, there's often like this last gasp of like breath, or like trying to I don't even know if it's trying to fight for life or I don't know what's happening in that moment, but there is a last gasp that happens. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these systems had a last gasp, which could be, somewhat uncomfortable for all of us to watch. But if we're remembering it's because they're dying and falling away, like we can find some grounding and peace in that, and not worry about not worry so much. I do think we're going to see some things that are going to be hard to watch. And I was actually thinking this is going to make me emotional too. Because I was thinking about receptivity recently, and understanding that that's a feminine principle, a yin principle. And I used to think of it like, just like lay back and like receive, like just be passive. And something that struck me recently was, no, it's to sit with exactly what you're seeing in that moment. And so um, that includes the grief of what we might see, that includes the horror and the heartbreak. And I don't, sorry, my dog is pushing. um, I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I think what I want to invite people to is like practice sitting and in receptivity now. And that includes sitting with your parts that are uncomfortable. That's where you have to start. You can start with a partner or a child or something out there in the external world, being with the part of you that's whatever coming up, because in everyone's meditation, something different will come up. But that's how we cultivate receptivity. Sitting with the chaos of the mind, sitting with the fear, sitting with, whatever the thing is that comes up in quiet sitting, and receiving the emotion of it, right? Because we cannot come to soul embodiment without moving through the emotion. There is they're just related. There's my dog. They're just related. They're because the soul, and I mean I come from feeling cognition, so I don't know if this is just bias because I'm feeling cognition, or if this is in all of the cognitions, but like has come to to sense something. Maybe that's a better expression, to sense something. And we have, and we're, and receiving that sense. And that's why I've always felt more connected to my cognition first over my spleen, is like receiving that sense, like gives us all the information that we need for that moment, for that exact moment. And when we allow life to come in and we receive life, all of life, the horrors and the highs, I mean, unfortunately, New Age spirituality talked about high vibe and like all of that for so long. So we had this hierarchy of something being better than other things, when the yin just wants receptivity and like just receive it, right? Um, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for speaking to this, because to me, what the leaders of the new earth are doing is they're being with what is. That's what it means to be a leader of the new earth, from my definition. To be able to accept reality as it is and allow that truth to move through your body and activate whatever needs to be activated, whether it's emotion or pain or, whatever it is. But we live in a time of so much delusion and this like grasping to the way that things have been is really a denial of reality.
Yeah.
It's a denial of the truth of where we're at. And the only path to embodying the new earth, to co-creating this new reality, is through accepting what is, being with what is. Spiritual bypassing will not get you to the new earth. All of the love and light in the world is not going to get you to the new earth. What's going to get you to the new earth is the grief, right?
Yeah.
Like, grieve the new world into being is this message that keeps coming through from my guides. Grieve the new world into being. Grieve the new you into being. It's through that process of descent, right? Grieving being this process that happens when we're in the darkness, when we're in that void space. We're able to let the truth of the horrors that we have experienced here on earth move through our body and teach us something, right? All of these things that are happening around the world are not for nothing. It's not, it may, I mean, on some level, it seems like just senseless violence. But that senseless violence is trying to wake us up to a truth.
Yeah.
It's trying to point us to something that as humanity we need to learn.
Yeah.
And so when we bypass the grief and really bypass the truth, we're not able to learn what we need to learn in order to mature as a species, as as the collective humanity. And so weaving this back around to where we started the conversation with our individual descents to soul and our individual maturation process, which is how we become adults, real adults, spiritual adults, right?
Yeah.
Our individual processes contribute to this collective process, right? This collective awakening, being with what is, facing the truth. It takes an incredible amount of courage. And when we see the world as mechanical and purposeless, I don't know, I just I just reject it. I just fully reject it. I really do feel that everything has a purpose here,
Yeah.
or at least we can see it that way, and that's what helps me stay here.
Mhm. 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 I'm glad you said that last part about staying here, because in the process to soul descent, I think it can you start to see, right? To see reality and see what we're doing to one another as humans, right? And what we're doing to the earth. I mean, that heartbreak, at least in my experience, like that heartbreak is horrifying. It's like how will we ever get out of this mess that we made? Like how this seems like an impossible task, right? And how does one stay embodied, um, and awake and aware, while all that's happening? Because I think there's many people who have had glimpses of reality, um, who then run away and go back to the matrix life, or back to their conventional life, or whatever, because it is so overwhelming. And so the more we can hold space for that, the more um, opportunity we give for it to come through holding and healing to that evolutionary process that you're pointing to. And I think the more on an individual level, the more of us that do the journey of our soul work, we can't look away, and we will no longer contribute to that suffering or that separation or that warring, right? Because the only thing that creates warring is othering, you know,
Mm.
and hierarchy. And so when we recognize that as a system that no longer supports us collectively and really never did, it supported technological progress to a degree, but it only supported a small group of people. Um, when more people come to realize that, then we are creative beings. We can create new systems. I mean, I think that's the thing that's so exciting, is like that. Oh, then we can stay here and be a part of creating a world that is more whole, that is more loving, that is more in tune with nature and her cycles, and in reverence of the that we were given the gift of the earth. Like we were given the gift of life, at least in my view. I mean, we were given the gift of life to get to experience all the beauty that's here, right? And I guess experiencing the horror is part of what we signed up for as well, but doesn't have to be the only part, And the more we can sit
Definitely.
with the witnessing, I think the dial will be turned down on the horror. I think the horrors have gotten louder because we've ignored them for so long.
Yes.
Um, and I too believe there is purpose, and I think yeah, because I tried the is it nihilist view. That doesn't work for me, because I I I just think there is a something that we're being guided toward. We may never get to see it, but I would rather be a part of that wiser thing that's making that's kind of calling the shots, than working against it or running away from it, just rather be in tune with it and see what happens. I mean, that's, I think, really the whole thing, right? Being in tune with where life is going, even if
Mhm.
this means this is the end of humanity. I know some people are saying that this is it, right? Humanity might not make it, and maybe that's true. And even if that's the case, I will be awake for it. I will be awake for the end of humanity, right? And I will help hospice the end of humanity, whatever it is.
Mm. Wow. Hospice, the end of humanity. Yeah. The role of, or the purpose of being awake, is to be a witness. That's it, right? And so that's just so beautiful the way that you put that. It's like whatever's happening, I'm going to be present for it. There's a reason that it's happening that we'll never fully understand or grasp. Um, but that's how we participate in reality, and that's how we participate in reality creation.
Yeah.
To close, I would love to hear your perspective on what is the new earth?
Mm. So, yeah, just my perspective, my dream, right? And so that's
Yeah.
I come from the answer comes from the place of like, what dream would I like to see? Right? What dream would I like to see for the collective? Not even I mean, we may never, right? But I can seed the dream, and plant it in the hearts of the next generation who then plant it in the next generation. And maybe it's, if we're lucky, it's one day um existing. I think for me, it is, I mean, it's so much about harmony, right? It's so much about like honoring, recognizing one another in life, but all as one thing, right? But there also being distinctiveness in it. I'm reminded of like at the end of yoga, my yoga instructors will often say, the light in me recognizes and honors the light in you. And like to me, if I could live in a world where everyone carried that in their hearts, then I think that would be a really cool earth to be part of, because if we recognize and honor one another, the light in one another, then beautiful things will be created from that. I don't know what it will look like in structures and materials and things like that, but like if that's the place of being that we all are existing in, then that's my dream, that dream of like deep, deep connection within ourselves and to the other.
Oh, I love that so much. Something that came through a few months ago was the new earth is just the earth where we remember our divinity and act in accordance with that gnosis.
Mm.
That's what we're doing here in Terra Nova. We're reawakening a divine society on earth.
Mm.
And I do believe that is the destiny of humanity to experience that. There are so many prophecies across religions and cultures that speak to this golden age where we remember.
Yeah, it's really heaven on earth. Heaven has been separated from us in thought, right? But that was never meant to be the case. This is the Garden of Eden, right? It's all right here. It's just a matter of us remembering and stepping towards that truth.
Beautiful. Any final words?
Mhm. I'm just feeling deep gratitude, deep gratitude for you and for the space and for the honoring that you bring towards this dream that I have in my heart, right? This is a space where that can be spoken freely, right? And is welcomed and recognized. So I'm feeling grateful for what that means for all of us, for you
Mm,
bringing that for all of us. Yeah.
thank you. Mm. And for everybody listening to this, Alison is going to be one of the community leaders that is holding down her frequency within Path to Power, this leadership development program container course where we're gathering together some of the leaders in the Terra Nova community and creating a space for other leaders who are ready to self-initiate themselves into their sacred role and purpose within the embrace of community. So you connected with Alison's frequency today. She'll be bringing her medicine there, speaking on all things soul, I'm sure. The descent to soul. Um, belonging is something else I think we'll probably I would love to record a whole other episode on belonging. Alison and I both have Chiron in the 11th house, so this is a topic that we speak about a lot. But yeah, we're super excited to gather together a group of leaders who are ready to really live their work, right? Reconnect with who they are and why they're here, and then give them the space to be able to do that within the Terra Nova community. And so you can join us there for more juicy conversations like this. Alison, do you also want to share a little bit about where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. I have an Instagram is just Alison Skoff, and my website is also alisonskoff.com, 1L. And yeah, I have some offerings on my website, but I also just welcome, kind of an open conversation for, kind of dealer's choice. For an individual, is really feeling that stirring and looking to be held in a soulful way. I really do love those conversations. We can, of course, use frameworks like the Gene Keys, human design, or astrology to land in a common language. But oftentimes what happens is, I can follow a very structured call, but also I can just, we can just go from there, right? And see what comes through. Yeah, I'm receptive. So, if someone wants to pull something from me, I'm open to that as well. But I love deep conversations, and have studied as a first line, have studied a whole bunch of different traditions and things. So yeah.
Yes. Alison is a well of wisdom. Quite literally, there's so much in there. So I invite you to connect with her, work with her. I walked through my Gene Keys, Genius sequence, Venus sequence, and Pearl sequence with Alison, and it really helped me understand the journey a little bit more. I have, been reading the Gene Keys for the last 3 years or so, and more so just reading individual keys, and hadn't really oriented to the sequences and the story that unfolds through them. And so if you're curious to dive a little bit deeper into your Gene Keys, I invite you to check out Alison's offerings. And during this conversation, Alison, I feel like just this maybe emerging kind of mythopoetic identity for you is really like soul doula. Like just like really, or soul birther. Like helping to bear like what you just do, who you just are, is like you have such a deep reverence and honoring for soul in that process of soul birthing. And I just kept getting the visual of you like literally being there as the doula, as the midwife for the soul. And so if you're in your journey of descent to soul and you're feeling like you need some support, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Alison.
Thank you.
And you can also find a lot of Alison's writing on the Terra Nova Substack, and that links to her Substack as well. She wrote an absolutely incredibly beautiful piece on what Terra Nova means to her. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the show notes here because I want everybody to read it because it just felt so powerful and true. Thank you, dear sister, dear friend, Alison. I love you so much. I'm so grateful to have your presence and your being within the Terra Nova ecosystem. And this absolutely is just the first of many conversations. I already have like 5 other topics that I want to chat with Alison about. And I think Cody and I are also going to do an episode with her as well soon. So you'll get more of Alison's juicy wisdom and magic soon.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I love you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Terra Nova. Here at Terra Nova, we are in the business of community, and so we'd absolutely love to hear from you. You're invited to connect with us on Instagram at terranova.community. Please like and subscribe on YouTube so our voices can reach more hearts. To hear from other voices in the Terra Nova community, subscribe to our Substack, where we share writings from community members, as well as updates on our latest events, projects, and classes. This project is filmed and produced by Terra Nova Media. A special thank you to Iman Alchemy for creating this special piece of music for this podcast. Sending you love wherever you are. We'll see you next time inside Terra Nova.